Michael from One Sky here with another lunar video. This one's going to take a look at the lunar cycle starting with the new moon on the 24th of March 2020, and that's happening in the stars of Pisces. We're going to look at this from the point of view of true Sidereal Astrology, also known as constellational or astronomical astrology, which uses the exact skies, the location of the actual constellations, as opposed to a zodiac or Ayanamsa that is made of even signs. So this kind of astrology is very interesting because it goes back to the ancient roots of astrology and how astrology has always been practiced in all of the cultures, with the exception of the modern Greek and subsequent traditions like in the West, modern Western, mainstream Western astrology today. So we're looking at this. We're looking at this from the point of view of a new moon in stars of Pisces. Now, to some people, like tropicalists, they are saying this happens in Eris. That's because they use a different zodiac. But what we're going to look at in this video is the new moon, especially taking a close look at the seed, the template of this lunar cycle, and then taking a look at the waxing quarter, the emergence of the expression of the energies of the cycle, the full moon, and the waning quarter moon. I do recommend you check out your own chart and take note of where this cardinal axis of new moon, waxing quarter, full moon, and waning quarter is, and take a look at how this matches up with your own personal astrology, especially because these videos can be helpful, but only to the extent that you engage in the building, designing of your own life in harmony with these cycles, and to the extent that your goals are in alignment with the way the wind is blowing, so to speak. So if you have access to a true sidereal natal chart, that's great. If you don't, I'm going to post a link down below to the online chart generator at Mastering the Zodiac. So I think in general, one of the main things that's going on in this new moon, laying the template of energies for the whole cycle, is the energies of Pisces, the stars that are behind this alignment of the sun and the moon. And Pisces is generally spiritual, very peaceful, forgiving, very sensitive, it's emotional, it's a little bit irrational, but it's very intuitive. It can be a little confused when it tries to think in a left-brained way. It's kind of like not the most reasonable influence. And there tend to be energies here, tendencies towards escapism. That's sort of the lower side, the shadow side of Pisces. The higher side being, again, very spiritual, very peaceful, very forgiving, very and very pacific as an influence, very calming. So the sun and moon are together in a degree of the sky that's 1 degree and 19 minutes from the star Diphda or Deneb Kaitos. And this is a star that is the brightest star in the constellation the Whale, Cetus. And this sits just south of the ecliptic from Pisces. And even though Diphda, or Deneb Kaitos, is the beta star in Cetus, it's actually the brightest star. Usually it's the case that the brightest star would be the alpha star. But in this case, Diphda, Deneb Kaitos, is the brightest, even though it's beta Cetus. I want to read a little bit about fixed star Deneb Kaitos for everybody. Vivian Robson writes, fixed star Deneb Kaitos causes self-destruction by brute force, sickness, disgrace, misfortune, and compulsory change. Elizabeth Aberton writes that the property of Deneb Kaitos is that of Saturn, and associated with it are inhibitions and restraint in every way, psychologically and physically. So these are the two main interpretations of this star that come to us today. Here in the degree of the Sun and Moon conjoining for the new moon, and if that sounds a little ominous, I want to say that the energies of Saturn most like discipline and restraint. So any success we have in limiting ourselves and engaging in discipline and restraint is likely to increase the higher resonance, the higher angles of any Saturnian influence. 1 degree away from the new moon here in Pisces is Chiron, the centaur, which activates both trauma and healing. And I just want to say I read this particularly in Pisces as representing the importance of processing our emotions at this time and having our feelings, not to suppress them, but that this could be a time of healing, and it could be a time of processing, even resolving, and it could also be a time of some traumatic influence. Chiron holds both signatures, the signature of the wound and also of the healing. And it's in the healing that we learn to be able to heal others. So all of this journey contained in the archetype of Chiron, here 1 degree away from the Sun and Moon. So leaving its stamp on the energies of this cycle. Also really important in this cycle is going to be this area of the heavens in the late Sagittarius, because we have Mars and Pluto having just conjoined about 0 degrees just a little while ago, and we have Jupiter approaching Pluto to come together for the first of what will be 3 contacts stretching throughout 2020. Jupiter and Pluto will be conjoined, and that's big. That's big, as we've seen without any mistake. Pluto conjunctions are massive. This tiny little planet the size of our moon, Pluto, when it comes into contact with larger bodies in conjunction, it can have sweeping effects. I've talked a little bit about the 60s being a reflection of the Uranus-Pluto conjunction. And now we're seeing, with the outbreak of COVID-19 and the overwhelm the hospitals are facing all around the world, we're seeing the effects of Saturn-Pluto conjunction, which went exact January 12th, just as this was picking up in China. So here is Pluto, and it's remaining very activated by conjunctions. Just at the end of the last lunar cycle, we will have seen Mars come into exact conjunction with Pluto. So all of that is kind of setting the stage. All of that, all of this global pandemic and these energies are something we're going to take a look at in this video from the point of view of examining a little more closely the Saturn-Pluto conjunction chart. Another interesting thing that's going to happen during the course of this lunar cycle is that Venus is going to move into Taurus, Neptune is going to move into Pisces, and Saturn is going to move into Capricorn. All three of these planets going to be in their home stars, the constellations associated with their particular energies. And this is going to be possibly a time of greater intensity in these areas, the areas of our life that are ruled depending on our personal charts, but also just the way this astrology has an effect on everybody. That Venus will be in Taurus is going to increase the strength and effect of Venusian energies, especially as opposed to her transiting Eris. And the same with Neptune and Saturn, are each going to be at home in their own stars. So we may see a little more shift in focus towards material resources in Taurus Venus's case. We may see a shift towards inspiration, artistic inspiration, and we may see a shift towards self-deception, confusion, and delusional thinking. With Neptune and Pisces, we could see that go very strongly in either direction. I still consider Neptune a malefic in spite of its spiritual properties. And Saturn here with the structure of power, the structure of authority, and the real world. This is Saturn's domain. Moving into Capricorn, stern, steady, perseverant Capricorn. You know, we may see things become quite a bit more authoritarian in the near future. And we have Mercury in Aquarius. So Mercury, who's been direct for a while now, moving through Aquarius, and this tends to be helpful in personal thinking, not taking things personally, but having a broader view, especially a humanitarian view. So it's great that as we go through this crisis, we have Mercury where it functions well in Aquarius, and by the end of the cycle, it'll move into Pisces. But we'll take a look at these. We'll take a look at these other charts as we go along. The Sun and Moon are making one notable relationship in that they're flanked in semi-sextile by Uranus in Eris and that Mercury in Aquarius. So this may be a time that we have some greater access to our genius or our insight or connection to higher mind, connection to higher truth, and real problem-solving capability and real analytical excellence comes with when you get Uranus and Mercury together. We see Jupiter, Pluto, and Mars together, and they're being squared by Eris here in Pisces. And I've come to read Eris a bit as the sort of shadow, a sort of where we aren't looking, where we aren't really paying attention. It seems to be this kind of basic level of strife and anxiety that we tend to, especially when it's in Pisces, that we tend to ignore, that we tend to kind of other or push away. And I think of Eris as kind of a primal strife or core anxieties. Of course, chaos, discord, and Jupiter in Sagittarius, especially so close to Pluto, which will intensify it. Jupiter in Sagittarius really tends to express as a truth-seeking and meaning-finding mechanism that through knowledge and discrimination comes to understand the world and gain, currency within and agency within, and just some kind of relationship to, some kind of meaningful relationship that allows us to move through the world. That's Jupiter's endeavor as it moves through Sag. And Pisces here works best in an attitude of surrender to the spirit of oneness, basically. That's kind of how you master energies in Pisces. So it's really asking for surrender to, and maybe, whether you think of that in terms of a higher power or just that the universe is bigger than you. Pisces is there always kind of reminding us of that. And you have the square, and it could struggle with this square. It could be talking about differences between our worldview, Jupiter and Sag, and fitting it into the real world, Eris and Pisces, the real brass tacks stuff of how are we going to implement this vision, how are we going to make it real, what good is it if we can't do it, and so it needs to be realistic. Running into those kind of obstacles is possible with the square. Also possible, the square could imply a struggle to integrate the individual, because Jupiter in Sag is very concerned with the individual's place, and could be a struggle between reconciling the individual's needs and the needs of the whole. This is the major adverse aspect, in effect, the square between Eris and the Sagittarius stellium. But it's important because the Sagittarius stellium continues to play a role in the unfolding of events. As we're seeing the broad range of Pluto conjunctions and their power. I bring up all that about Pisces and integrating with the whole, just because the new moon's here. This is the stamp, the essence, the fragrance that will permeate this lunar cycle. So we want to be mindful that the whole cycle arises out of a Piscean seed, and that the sun will remain in Pisces throughout most of the cycle. This will be helpful in understanding the phases that the moon will go through. So, taking a look at the waxing quarter moon, we have in this instance a sort of template for the sprout or the emergence of the seed that was planted at the new moon. What will emerge? Well, a week later, on April 1st, we're likely to see with the moon in Gemini. With the moon in Gemini, we may be integrating information relating to that surrender, and to that kind of surrender of the ego to the whole, or to the needs of the all. We might be integrating information, moon in Gemini, relating to that. It might be difficult to appreciate. Venus is here actually semi-squaring the sun and moon, right from the sun and moon midpoint, on the star Algol, the head of the demon, or the Lilith star, for those of you who are familiar with its mythology. And this is interesting. The Sagittarius stellium continues to progress as Jupiter moves into conjunction with Pluto, and Saturn is conjoined by Mars in early Capricorn. And a Saturn ingress into Capricorn, flanked by Mars, is that's no small matter. I think that's going to express itself in a militant and in an authoritarian way. And I think it's easy to see that within the context of the current global situation. I think we're going to see with the Pluto-Saturn conjunction and its echoes, its effects, as this SARS-CoV-2 virus spreads and COVID-19 overwhelms medical systems, I think we may see things change to become more corporate. And I think we may see things become much more heavy-handed and conformist, at least for a while, and possibly as a sort of longer-term wave, a more broadly sweeping wave. So, taking a look at the full moon, what we see is that it is in Virgo. So we had the waxing quarter in Gemini, and we will have the waning quarter in Sagittarius. And all of these star groups, Pisces, Gemini, Sagittarius, and Virgo, are mutable star groups, and they have to do with the energy of flexibility, being able to adapt and change easily. They also have to do with the handling of information. Gemini is where we develop patterns of information and communication, where we relate and have access to just facts, knowledge. In Virgo, we discriminate with that knowledge and we apply it to work. And in Sag, we go deeper with it, looking for meaning, looking for context, looking at bigger picture stuff, looking at worldview, developing philosophies and religions, developing political systems. And in Pisces, we go beyond knowledge. It's very important to understand the Virgo-Pisces dichotomy in this way, in that Virgo and Gemini both are actually a little bit anxious. They're like anxiously applying themselves to knowledge. That's the influence that they present. And Pisces is Pisces, by going beyond knowledge, has access to it. So Pisces, by sort of becoming intuitive, not thinking, it can receive information. But Pisces is actually not very rational or reasonable like the other three mutable signs. So it is not without its access to information. It's a totally different access to information from the other three. It's a direct access to information. So this is representing kind of the culmination of the journey of knowledge. We have acquiring it in Gemini, to wielding it in Virgo, to refining it in Sagittarius, to transcending it in Pisces. And that's the theme of the cardinal axis of this lunar cycle. So, and just an interesting note there that all of these moons are happening in the mutable star signs. This moon squared by the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction, and the Sun conjoined to Eris now by 5 degrees. So I would really expect this cycle to be maybe about bringing in some of the information that we've been presented with the moon in making its corners in Gemini and Virgo, and that there might be a little bit at odds that with sort of new worldview, new bird's eye view that has developed. And with Jupiter conjoined to Pluto, there may be a death of hope and optimism before there's a rebirth. This might be the story of our journey through 2020 in many ways, as this will go retrograde and over it again. So for 3 contacts in 2020, Jupiter, Pluto. And this square up to the Sun and Moon is indicating to me that there may be a little bit of difficulty integrating the new, maybe reality, integrating the new vision, maybe the new dream, the new hope, or potentially a newly emerging worldview, a newly emerging philosophy, or way of organizing society. Jupiter is the teacher. It's the opposite of Saturn, where Saturn organizes in a contracting way. Jupiter organizes in an expanding way. They're almost kind of like brothers there in their effect, the dark one and the light one. So we may have hope, we may have vision, but we may not be able to apply it, discriminate, and implement it with the moon in Virgo, especially with Eris here applying squares to the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction and opposition to the moon as well. And I want to look next at the waning quarter. And as the moon comes around, it's actually going to join at 27 degrees. It's going to get right in between Jupiter and Pluto for its final square to the sun before we come back around for the next new moon in Eris. And this moon coming into Sagittarius, where for the full moon we had opposition to the sun, and we had a T-square up to this. Now the moon has come to conjoin, so maybe there is this reconciliation here with what may have been at odds. At the time of the full moon, maybe obstacles reconciling anything around Jupiter and Sagittarius, anything around bigger picture, context, worldview, anything around hope, anything around optimism. We may have access to that, and we may have clarification around that around the 14th, excuse me, around the 14th of April. And this moon in Sag is also receiving an Eris square, and the sun is conjoined to Eris, so we'll see that for the later part of this lunar cycle, that Eris in Pisces will play its part. And throughout this entire from eclipse season onward to now, and remember that eclipse, that first eclipse of January, it was quickly followed by a lunar eclipse 2 weeks later, was, I think, right in between, or this looks like right after the full moon. Right after that full moon, we had Saturn and Jupiter in Saturn and Pluto in conjunction. Saturn and Pluto. So we're looking at this chart from 12th of January 2020 right now. We've gotten away from the lunar cycle, and I want to be really clear. We've gone in the DeLorean, and we've gone back to 12th of January 2020. I want to look here at the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, but I want to remind everybody how big it was. We had the Sun and Mercury in the same degree of the sky as Pluto and Saturn when they became exactly conjoined in Sagittarius. And as they were in the stars of Sagittarius, their dispositor, Jupiter, who was at home, ordinarily would have bestowed quite a great blessing on anything happening of that nature, but was caught up with Ketu, caught up with the south node of the moon, the headless one, the mindless one. And this has a force and effect when it comes into conjunction. It can have as just sort of a deranging or almost like a perverting or a corrupting effect. The south node can be really challenging to deal with, and it can bring out really twisted aspects of planets that it touches. So in retrospect, it's hard to say, oh, this is going to express itself in any particular way. There's no link, to my knowledge, between the stars of Sagittarius or any of this and a novel coronavirus, except that in Vedic astrology, Saturn rules illness, disease, sickness. So we do have Saturn here deepened and intensified by Pluto, joined by the sun. And all of this was squared at that time by Eris in Pisces. Eris is a very slow-moving body, so anything that's here in late Sag, passing through this sort of zone right here, is going to be squared by Eris. And you know, we can just see the semi-square from Mars, and in retrospect look at this chart and say, oh wow, that's, you know, that's heavy. That looks like it's going to be serious. And I didn't want to raise alarmist concern at that time, but I thought to myself, wow, something's going to happen. The structure of power was going to change. I thought it had something to do with Trump's impeachment. But it seems to have manifested on a bit of a broader scale than that. So yeah, getting back to where we were, this waning quarter moon, the last quarter moon on 14th of April 2020. Looking at again that square between Sagittarius and Pisces kind of emphasized here, that square that square, talking about you know, confronting how our optimism might fit with our worldview, how our worldview might fit with the real world, and how we place ourselves in all of this context and the bigger picture. Basically a little bit of a square contradiction between what does it mean, and you know, a sort of expression here of it's just, it is what it is. Whether you take a deist or a scientific or whatever explanation of that, whether you call it a fancy way of saying I don't know, or you know, whether you really have faith in that mystery of Pisces, the Piscean mystery. So just to take an overview of this cycle, it's marked by a need to surrender our egoic perspective and the needs that we may have to life, to surrender those to life, to the bigger picture, to service, to spirituality, to these are the things that Pisces asks of us. It's higher expression. If we're to step out of the risk of confusion, misinformation, delusion, self-deception and denial, if we're to step out from the shadow of that and into the higher angles of Pisces, it's through surrender and service. It's in the peaceful and the pacific, being that supportive beacon and calm to others. These are very Piscean ideals and expressions. The star, Deneb Kaitos, Diphda, that the new moon is taking place in the degree of, it has a very restrictive and inhibiting influence. I wouldn't expect this to be a cycle of a lot of growth and movement forward. I would expect this to be about treading water. We also have the mutable star signs with their information gathering and their use, their mastery and refinement, and their transcendence. So this is a journey about information. We're getting information here from life, and this is about the gathering, the use, the integration of information, and how we organize our world. And there's a special emphasis this cycle on worldview, and all of this happening in late Sagittarius, Saturn closing up Sag and Mars closing up Sag, Pluto and Jupiter taking up residence there for a while. This lunar cycle especially, we have heightened emphasis on the refining of information, delving into it, gaining context and access to meaning. We have this cycle marked by a death and rebirth of Jupiter in Sag coming into contact with Pluto, first of 3 contacts for 2020, and that could be a death and rebirth of hope. It could be a death and rebirth also of finance, and it could be a new way of looking at the world, among other things. And lastly, we do have the ingress of Venus, Saturn, and Neptune into their own stars of Taurus, Pisces, and Capricorn. And I think you can expect things to become a little more pacified, drowsier, dreamier, for better or worse. I think you can expect things to become a little more authoritarian and corporate in the case of Saturn and Capricorn. And I think you can expect that people will place a greater emphasis on those Taurian values of security and not just comfort, but stability. All right, my friends, that's a look at this lunar cycle, and I want to wish everybody well. I want to wish everybody who's looking at lockdown and quarantine well. I want to wish everybody who has had to quit working very well. I want to wish everybody who's gotten sick incredibly well. And to all of the star family, my friends, my family, and loved ones, I wish you safety, wellness, health, peace, and all good things in this time. Thank you. I'll see you next time.